Hello everyone, I'm Chandini Chaudhary, a conservation architect who works for the Heritage Cell, Jaipur Nagar Nigam Heritage. Today, facilitated by the Jaipur Virasat Foundation, we are holding a panel discussion on heritage, culture and the efforts to promote it in the state of Rajasthan on a special request from the West Zone Cultural Centre, Government of India. For this, I have with me two people who have worked extensively in the field of heritage and allied fields across the state of Rajasthan and way beyond. Dr. Shikha Jain, Director Drona, who has wide experience in cultural heritage, ranging from representations at UNESCO World Heritage Committee meetings to conservation planning and implementation of conservation and museum projects across India. She has also served as the member secretary to the Advisory Committee on World Heritage from 2012 to 2015 for the Indian Ministry of Culture. Joining her is Dr. Rima Hooja, an archaeologist, historian, and writer par excellence. She serves currently as the director of the Maharaja Savai Mansingh II Museum Trust, Jaipur, as well as of the Jaigarh Museum Trust, Jaipur. It is befitting that this discussion is centered around the state of Rajasthan, also rightly called the land of kings. And as heritage professionals, we can wax eloquent about the measures taken to conserve, preserve, and promote the aspects of heritage, both tangible and intangible, in the state. But it shall be equally unjust if we do not also talk about the challenges and issues that we come across as professionals of this field while we are engaged in the efforts towards the same. Also, the conundrum of changing attitudes towards heritage is greatly something that needs thought. Dr. Hooja is perhaps the best person to throw some light on this particular topic. Ma'am, how would you say that continuously changing perspectives towards heritage have evolved across the years and affected the very attitude of people?
I can unmute myself, which I have done. Thank you very much for having me on this panel. Thanks to the West Zone Cultural Center and Jaipur Virasat Foundation. Thank you, Chandni, for being here to moderate this, and Shikha for being my co-panelist. How have people's perceptions changed? I think to an extent, people think of heritage as something to do with the past. I don't know what they thought about immediately post pre-partition and pre-independence and immediately post-independence, but the idea all along has been heritage is something that is around them. It is not something that the average person has valued much. So even though they're aware of everything, they are not really bothered over much about it until schools started having heritage clubs and until the drama came to them face to face. I'm saying drama in the form of Jantar Mantar getting World Heritage status, World Heritage Site of UNESCO status, the hill forts getting that status, and of course the city of Jaipur getting that status. This is all to do with the built heritage more in the eyes of the people. And for a lot of them, I think the attitude still is, this is an ancient fort, it looks very nice. It'll look even nicer if we can kind of modernize it. So there's a dichotomy in the way they are looking at it there also, that the past is there, but there are bits of the past which look too old to them. So if you can make it into a shiny modern piece, then in the eyes of some people, that is the ideal blend. Now, the problem, of course, in your question, Chandni, is which group does one talk about? So I'm going to leave it there, but say that that is the way a lot of them have looked at it. And as an archaeologist, when I would go somewhere and I would be looking at the ground, mainly I was always hoping, even in an impossible situation, I was hoping to find, some spectacular find in some part of Rajasthan. Something nobody had seen before, and I thought it would be lying under my feet. And they would say, you're not going to fall, it's okay. And I would say no, and I would pick up a bit of pottery and say this, oh, but that's only a thikra. Why are you interested in a bit of pottery? So we still have that attitude, but it's changed a lot.
This was, ma'am, a collective realization while working for the Jaipur Municipal Corporation. We used to think that it's difficult only to explain the importance of heritage to laymen. However, in the past year and a half, we realized that it's equally difficult to impress upon the administrators the complexities of heritage management and to suggest the mitigation of the negative impacts of popular development models. While working towards meeting our commitments to the UNESCO as part of the inscription of the World Heritage Site of Jaipur City, we've come across this question numerous times, and this is something that requires greater elucidation. Perhaps Dr. Jain would be more suited to answer how best to integrate heritage into the contemporary frameworks of planning and governance. Ma'am?
Okay, so I've unmuted myself, and before I start, I would also like to thank the West Zone Cultural Center, Jaipur Virasat Foundation, and Chandni you for moderating, and my co-friend, co-panelist, advisor, Dr. Rima Hooja. So that's a challenging question that you've asked, on how to integrate one, of course, heritage into planning, which is a big challenge. But Jaipur has really, I would say, done quite well compared to other cities in India in that aspect. The other point that you mentioned about actually, the awareness or explaining it to the administrator who's in charge is again another big challenge that we have to encounter, almost every year or every 2 year, simply because the person changes and the mindset changes, and you have a new person who's come up with a new his own perspective, his or her, and explaining the whole story to them. So for me, I've been working in Jaipur since 2006, I would say. I mean, of course, I belong to Jaipur. I was born and brought up there, but really in working with the heritage of Jaipur consistently since 2006, when we first prepared the Jaipur Heritage Management Plan, and it was actually the first city level heritage management plan ever prepared in India. Fortunately, of course, in books and in academia, or even in the Ministry of Urban Development, Jaipur has been appreciated a lot. And as Dr. Hooja said, it has been consistent. We could get the World Heritage status for Jantar Mantar in 2010, the hill forts in 2013, including Amer, which was part of Jaipur. And then in 2015, we could actually get the crafts UNESCO status for City of Crafts and Folk Art, which is for intangible and recognizing the crafts and culture of Jaipur. And then in 2019, Jaipur is World Heritage City. So it's got quite a bit of UNESCO tag. It already has a big international recognition with other events like Literature Festival and all. So and there is a value for heritage, I see. I mean, in people and locals. But as Dr. Hooja has said, there are different levels of communities, and even in administrators, there are different levels, So sometimes I have been really fortunate, when we are dealing with, or, the administrators are really visionary. And that's how I would say we really could get through these 4 UNESCO inscriptions. Because at that point of time, the person sitting on the official seat was a visionary. He or she could see, what potential Jaipur has, and they could give the commitment that UNESCO wants. But what happens is then, the officers change and they forget. No, the new person doesn't know about the commitment. They don't understand, what needs to be done, and it all starts falling apart. So it's basically then people like you and me and others, Dr. Hooja and Jaipur Virasat Foundation, which was one of the key organization, for promoting awareness on heritage. So similar NGOs, I mean, that's all we can do. Just again, remind the government and remind the people, that this is something of great value, not just at local, national level, but at international level. So let's pull it together and, preserve it, conserve it, and enhance it in the right manner. So I hope it answers your question.
It does, ma'am, indeed. Thank you. Well, there's another thing that comes recurringly to me. Both you and Dr. Hooja have numerous publications to your name, written works and such. And anybody who's done their research on the state of Rajasthan is bound to come across your works. So I'm sure that you have, as scholars, come across the very painful issue of finding credible research to resource your works from or base your works on, whether it's the preparation of a nomination dossier, heritage management plan, or just a descriptive essay on a particular topic or era or event. So, because as a researcher myself, I've often lamented the loss of written archives or the weathering of the oral tradition of transfer of knowledge from one generation to another. Not being able to source the right maps that I need to date a particular development in an urban settlement, and various such examples. So, a question from me would be, how have you, in your personal capacities, ever worked towards the consolidation of such heritage traditions which ensure the continuation of knowledge for future? Or otherwise, alternatively, how do you approach the field of research? How exactly do you take up the first step towards producing a credible document that I'm sure would further go on to be someone else's reference material?
I think it is really it's like doing research all over again each time you look at any aspect. So you try and get all the background reading done, which anyone does, if either you're doing a project or something else. But we also need to pay attention to the tradition, to the oral. Also, what is the term? Urban legend equivalent. What do the people say about it? Because even if that is not historically accurate, it is a perception. And we need to pay attention to that perception. Also, pay attention to where the truth in that could be. If that is not factually true, there would be something on which it is based. So, you go for the actual data from publications, from unpublished works, you go in for interviews, but you also go in for beliefs that people have. That brings us to, of course, an issue I'm sure you will take us to wander through next at some point: intangible. Because a lot of what is in this traditional knowledge will maybe not be about which ruler went and did build in a certain place, but they might say this was built at Amer, for example, the belief that the blue tile and it is coming in from a mixture of the Central Asia, or it is all of those kind of beliefs, which may not stand the test of hardcore data, are important when you're researching something. So you basically have to listen to everyone, even if, in your opinion, as an investigator, they know less than you, because there might be points where they know more than you do, despite your own background and your reading. You may be missing out something. That, in a nutshell, is mine. But I would like to hear from Dr. Jain next. Shikha, let's drop all the doctors. Just go for Rima.
Yeah, sure. Okay, Rima. So, yeah, this is a very interesting question, and one I would say, research is never ending. And we've done a little bit. I've done in a few years, but there's so much more to discover still in Jaipur, and it keeps going on. You will do it, maybe the next generation will do it, or it will continue. But for me, of course, Rima was one great resource right from the time I was doing my PhD. And at that time, I was not studying the city of Jaipur, but it was on Havelis of Rajasthan. But I remember wandering into the streets of Jaipur, identifying which Haveli I have to study, the Nawab Ki Haveli and the Nataniyo Ki Haveli. And also, I came across these, like the Tatar Khana house, and the person explained to me, the owner, how, they used to do water heating. That's how the Tatar Khana was for the royal family. So that, it started, that discovery sort of started, and with every work, every project I did, there was a new discovery, because you're talking to more people. I would say each and every citizen of Jaipur is a storehouse of knowledge and repository. So, and to tap on all of them is just impossible. But of course, whenever we did a new thing, like when we did the UNESCO crafts dossier, we learned from the crafts people. We found out about this family, who came from Pakistan, which was part of India earlier, but moved to Amer and then continued, to shifted to Jaipur and continued on the Meenakari. And we learned, the whole process of making that craft. So it's at every point one learns new thing, and there's a new story linked with Jaipur. There are, so museum Jaipur, and that itself was a great resource. I remember into the maps that Dr. Chandramani has compiled that book, where we could just look at the old maps, and they were in Dundari, but they were just photocopies because Kapadwara is currently logged. And most researchers are just dying to get their hands on those maps, which Savai just guessing to collected. And but one could, even those photocopies, I would just enlarge and study the area, so we could find where the Haveli was, or how things change, or even looking at Bikaner archives, which has a lot of material when we were doing Vidyadhar Bagh and Sisodia Rani Bagh. So how the British were handling, at that time PWD was established, and what were the changes they made during that time, the Albert Hall. So for each period, there's so many documents, so many archives, and of course the oral history. So I would say, collating all the information, even now, it hasn't been done by anyone till now, but there are sufficient resources, and it'll be great if we can pull it together and present it in some way. And that's one reason we started this jaipurworldheritage.com website, because I realized that there's so much of data stored, and it needs to reach out to people, even fresh students, who are studying Jaipur in particular. So I think it's good if we have like a database. Ideally, I think municipal corporations should do it as part of their World Heritage City commitment. But at least, whoever, all of us have come together, so many NGOs, so whatever we have can be put together, so it's all, linked and can be used in a fruitful manner in future.
Maybe an exhibition of some of the maps which are in our respective collections, if we have them, for the people of Jaipur, or if we're talking of any other city, for the people of those cities.
That's such a wonderful idea, ma'am. Indeed. I'm sure jaipurworldheritage.com will be a treasure trove of knowledge, maps, and trivia for students and researchers specifically who have limited resources at their disposal. Perhaps the Jaipur Municipal Corporation can too be more proactive in knowledge dissemination. And as a quarter of the Heritage Cell, I can initiate some brainstorming on a framework that enables us to do that. For we have plenty of information, especially in the form of record city surveys from the years of 1926 and 1947, where the entire world city was very detailed, documented in a very detailed manner. Now, speaking of sources of information, I'd actually want to ask Rima ma'am to tell us how museums have dealt with this lockdown period. As with any other institution, of course, there are going to be maintenance issues due to absence of footfall. Perhaps even security measures had to be upped because people were not visiting every part of the museum. And you'd want to inventorize everything. Perhaps this also was beneficial for certain museums where they could take up renovating works or conservation of artifacts. But coming back to what I wanted to know, ma'am, do you think that there would be a renewed interest in visiting museums again and learn from it? Or the fact that there was such a deluge of content online that people were overwhelmed in a way, and they now have visibly shortened attention spans. So do you think that people are going to be in museums more just because they want to be out and about with the subsequent unlocking of the country? Or is going to the museum going to be an activity that's going to recede to the backs of people's mindscapes? I'd really want to know what you think of this.
This is actually a very strange time because it's like having a blank canvas, and almost like what we can imagine can come true. This is a time where a lot of organizations, museums, are looking at their own strengths, weaknesses, possibilities. Some of them have, the term hybrid museums is already there. Shikha Ji's group has just, Drona has sponsored a talk on it, and she spoke in it also. People are considering how do you have visitors back in museums? If it is physically possible, of course. In some organizations, like say the Maharaja Savai Mansingh Museum, where the buildings is such that it is beautiful, you can look at it from the outside. Perhaps when it is open in a limited way, that is one of the things that certain traditional conventional museums can do. Open up the spaces where it is safe and let those be seen. But then, as you said yourself, it is what is inside that people also want to see. And how can we do that? Until the point where a museum is allowed to be open, you have limitations. You can have outside activities. And some organizations have turned to doing virtual tours, turned to having all kinds of models and images that can be brought outside and looked at. It will also depend on what that organization, what that specific museum's directors, trustees, whoever the board deciding will do, whether they want to make it part virtual tour, whether they don't like the idea of virtual tours. I mean, the Louvre has put all its collections out in a virtual format. It is easier for museums that have a lot more digital content, like photography. So Map Bangalore is doing collaborations with some of us, some of the other organizations. And a more conventional, traditional museum, like the City Palace Museum, may well find that our next 6 months, once we are open, will be moving slowly, trying to get local visitors in. If it looks like we cannot get people from outside the state or from other different parts of the country, at least try and get the local ones in which case we'll have to tailor make some activities for them. How do you have repeat visitors rather than, they come in to visit the exotic? By the same token, the other little museum we have, in this case of the City Palace, it's museum and some buildings, but we're in the heart of the city. So if there is a lockdown or situation or a part curfew situation or a full curfew situation, it affects us. What can happen with the other museum that is part of where I'm also involved, the Jaigarh Public Charitable Trust and its museum? There, the physical galleries are small. There are only 2 of them. But there's a lot to see in the ramparts of the building. There's that famous cannon. There's a cannon foundry. There is enough for a visitor to come, walk the ramparts, walk the garden, to imagine what life would have been if they were there, and not miss a gallery so much. We still need a gallery, but it can be without it. So there again, it's going to be the call that we take. If we are not going to have a foreign visitor coming in, or a visitor from wherever coming, a different part of coming in, how much can we build on the local people, and how much do we tailor make for the local people? But then I also want to bring in the Jaipur Virasat Foundation's own music museum, where it's a small physical space. We have the flexibility in that the music is, you would go in today's world, you need to be sure of the hygiene of the headphones and of sanitizing, which we have been doing. But you also have options of taking your own headphones in, listening to the music. You don't have to see, we have a screen and you can see the musicians perform, and that's good because it gives you a glimpse of their culture. But to hear the music, there can be alternate ways. And I think the trustees of the Jaipur Virasat Foundation have been more open, and our current creative director has been much open to finding alternate ways of doing something. So whether it is collaborations, whether it is you stay in the music museum, but you move out of that physical space when COVID regulations permit you, and you do all the other activities that Jaipur Virasat Foundation has done in the past so many years, like the city walks, which Drona and Vinod Joshi and others had put together, like the Ghat Ki Guni walks, like exploring again, the intangible parts, the foods, the lesser known or the better known through new eyes, and the lesser known through, again, a guided, curated tour. So some of these options will be the way forward. It will probably not be the same for everyone because situations, again, they differ from state to from point to point, city to city, situation to situation. How many employees do you have? How soon do you want to have your horse ride buggies back in? Those kind of things. And one part of me says that the way to get the economy kick-started is as soon as we are vaccinated enough and as soon as things are safe enough. If things can open, we still keep our masks on. I've got mine right here. And keep our social distancing or our physical distancing. And come back to the museums, come back to the spaces we can collectively discover, rediscover our heritage together. I think that's going to be a big start for all of us. Thank you for that question.
I myself am looking forward to being able to visit the City Palace Museum again, ma'am. But along the same lines, actually, Shikha ma'am, I also have a question for you, which actually stems from the observation that during this lockdown period, heritage was at risk. There were always risks to heritage, of course, but right now, when we did not have access and the regular monitoring could not be taken up because we were all holed up in our homes, these heritage assets were at a greater risk. Do you, as a professional, envisage any legislative frameworks or instruments, other instruments, which can be used to safeguard heritage in times like these that monitoring schedules go for a toss? Like on a larger scale, in countries where heritage is targeted by terror groups, we have the supporting hashtags of heritage in danger, heritage in conflict. But we have no conflict here, thank goodness. But we have something that's much more dangerous. That's apathy, both from people and from administrators. So, what do you think, ma'am? Do you have any ideas about this particular event, concept?
Yeah, that's something I think the world over has faced. During the pandemic, there was a lot of vandalism of heritage sites, and I mean even museums, theft and all were there. But of course, in an open city, it's what is of concern is what kind of vandalism could there be. And if we actually look at Jaipur, initially Jaipur really did very well in controlling the pandemic, the way they used drone. And this was something even well appreciated by the World Heritage Center of UNESCO on how Jaipur is being the epicenter also is trying to control. And I think the government was very proactive. Our police did very good work of that. But what you're mentioning about heritage vandalism is something in general also links to your first question about perception of heritage. And so the damage that I see here is not due to pandemic, but it's more because of understanding, of what is heritage. And irrespective of whether we are in the lockdown mode or not, it's happening. It's just that what you said, that maybe there are more people looking, maybe we can monitor, there is better access so one can control it then. Rather than now, because there are lots of things happening, but we don't have access to it. But to your other question, whether any legislative framework, I have really sort of, lost trust in any legislation for, since a long time, because I don't think there is any legislation or heritage regulation missing in Jaipur. And this was something told to me by, one of the gurus on heritage legislation, Sham Chenani, in the 90s, when I first discussed with him about Jaipur. He said, you have the regulations there, it's just they are not enforced. And even if you see it today, even if you implement your 70s municipal act to the word, to the last word, you will see that Jaipur can retain its heritage. So all these bylaws that keep getting generated, it's just for the face of it. Unless people realize, unless the administrators or the corporation realizes that they need to enforce it. And we in most of the Jaipur issues are of encroachment, So it's illegal. Those are encroach upon cases, and this is something the administration has to support, to stop. The court has to stop. So it has not. We can't say that there's no legislation existing, and that's why it's happening. It's happening because the legislation is not being enforced. So that is a question we need to ask our administrators. Why for so long it's not being enforced, even for areas like the Jaipur city wall itself, which is a protected state protected archaeology, monument, you would say, one of the identified. And there was a space like buffer that was created for it, but it was not followed, and not followed only by the people but by the government themselves. They started building their own buildings there. So unless the government first removes those structures and encroachments, you will find 30-40% encroachment is actually its own, like the government's own. So first they should remove that, then the people get realize that they can't just build anything. They need to demolish. Even if they demolish one encroachment of a private house, the others would get scared to build it. It's happened in Delhi, it's happened in so many places. I don't know why Jaipur can't do it, and Jaipur has done it during Operation Pink. So we just need somebody, a political will or a strong officer to take that forward, and it will happen.
There is a silver lining to this, ma'am. Actually, just recently, our new commissioner issued some orders for the demolition of illegal construction and encroachments in certain parts of the city. So this is actually the beginning of taking very positive steps. And but this does bring me back to my first question of how perceptions change one's way of handling heritage. If you are more sympathetic towards heritage, your way of handling it shall differ from somebody who is apathetic, of course. And this is actually the most monumental challenges in this field. The way you address diverging perceptions towards heritage. Now, another example of this is actually the newest buzzword, urban conservation, which addresses only tangible aspects of heritage. As a conservation architect, I find myself guilty of focusing on that too. But working in the city of Jaipur, you cannot ignore that there are intangible aspects of heritage as well, which are equally important, if not more. We also know this because, as Dr. Jain previously mentioned, that Jaipur is the creative city of crafts and folk art. We have intangible traditions that are deeply rooted in our psyche and which actually lend a lot to our sense of identity. So, when we translate heritage, the nuances of it for laymen, is it only the absence of awareness that's creating all the issues? Or there is actually something that's more crucial here, some underlying issues that we are yet to bring to the fore? Are there bottlenecks which you have as heritage professionals encountered while working in the field? Or perhaps you want to shed some light on the loopholes that people exploit, both people and administration. So, what do you have to say about this, ma'am? Either of you, actually.
Before I come to kind of loopholes that the government needs to address, there are times where well-meaning regulations also change the nature of the heritage. So I'm noticing, since I need to come through the old city of Jaipur to my place of work, there's a very standard grill that is being put up in a lot of window embrasures. That grill, and they're often, the old lime plaster is being knocked out in order to fit that in. You do that at one level, the whole city is going to copy. I've seen the aluminium frames come up. I've seen cement chachas coming in, replacing the older ones. The issue of perception gets linked to what you see being legitimized around you, being almost valorized around you. So in this process, there is a certain uniformity you're trying to impose on the city. And yes, the city has been uniform, but within it, there have been minor, there's been this leeway to do what you want. So like behind me, you have these fan lights. Now, this is not traditional Haveli. This is something that was put in later. But within the Havelis also, you will find that some of them, the petals will be larger. The petals can be smaller. They can be pointed. they can be in stone, they can be in lime. We cannot then say, everybody take your window frames out, remove the wooden ones, just because that is actual tampering with heritage in a far more dangerous way than the average citizen can do to their own building if they are not stopped. So, part of this issue then comes to what is their perception of heritage? Do they realize that it is a relationship between them and the community and the city and what they've got from the past, which goes through to the future? That linkage is all of which is going to be heritage. Instead of which they put it in little, and I'm using they in a sense in which I think I don't know who I want as a target that I'm targeting when I say they. But the tendency becomes to say, my definition of heritage means it's an old building, but I will do everything I want to do to it and then impose it on you. I might not have the right ideas everywhere because I'm not following professional advice when I make that change. So, if I, you see, to an extent, tradition is also involved with heritage. So, the parampara is part of heritage, but the parampara has changed over time. So, a building, one of the final points which got Jaipur its World Heritage status was that it's got Jai Singh's 18th century, it's got the changes which came in, it's got Ram Singh Ji's thing, it's got Mirza Ismail's thing, it's got layers upon layers, and yes, three broad layers are identified, but you have more than that. And that recognition is what makes a place a living city or a space or a monument or a site, along with the intangible parts that come. And I know that Shikhaji and her team worked with, say, having the flower sellers go back to where they used to be, because that is what made Jaipur. So you see, it was all interconnected. You had your lane, you walked out, you had what you needed at the end of it. To an extent, it might seem I am saying let's go back in time. That's not what we are saying. But what we are saying is, if you decide that your heritage, whether it is the city of Jaipur, whether it is another city within India or within Rajasthan, or it is something built in stone or brick, depending again on which part of the country that building has come up, you can do what you want in another area and make something even in stainless steel. I mean, that would be a unique way of an architectural experiment. But you do not do it to an existing heritage site. And when you do it to an existing heritage site, the message it will send out to the other people, the last vast population, is that they can make the changes also. And then they end up erasing the heritage part, erasing the past, and only having the future. Again, that is a collective uh, possibility that can happen. But when we have the intangible linked with it, you have to be doubly careful. You have to make sure that the perceptions are given enough value and are shared and are not downtrodden. And so the flower seller at the chopper is not told that you are a nuisance to the eye, because when a visitor is driving from point A to point B, they don't want to be distracted by you. For heaven's sake, this is a city where the international and national visitors have come from the time the city was built to look at precisely those kind of things. They are not coming to look at an antiseptic hospital corridor. They want to have all of that. But of course, they don't want it to the extent of which you fall into potholes. So that part is there. I'm not saying we live only in the past. But the perception needs to be balanced. What is right with the heritage needs to come first, not what is my perception needing to come first. So, what is right with heritage, or what is wrong with making heritage the right way, is what we need to also concentrate on, even as we go into the 22nd century, say at the end of the second decade of the 21st. Over to you. I've taken a lot of time. So, Shikha, your views.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you, Rima. But of course, I mean, I would also like to say, despite whatever challenges Jaipur is facing, and to retain its UNESCO tag, whatever commitments it has to give, but it has also established role models in the process. Like I said, if you compare it to cities across India, and one of the most important step that Jaipur took, I mean, right, of course, from making the Jaipur heritage management plan, which I said was the first of its kind. But as a conservation architect, I always used to think, there were sites that used to be conserved, and I used to wonder what would be really my dream project, or what would I feel, my dream as a conservation architect is realized. And I always used to think, if there is a city, like the entire historic city being conserved using lime and traditional materials, the way we build big housing projects in concrete, or do new cities in concrete. And this happened in Jaipur when the first three bazaars were taken in 2013-14. The first bazaars, when they were for the first time conserved using these traditional materials. Also, because Rajasthan archaeology was the first department. I mean, this is something even ASI had not done. They were the first department in India who actually came out with a schedule of rates for traditional materials, for construction techniques, and promoted the craftspersonship of Rajasthan. And Jaipur was, in that sense, the laboratory for this, which actually started with Amer Fort, which was again one of the major fort that was taken up for the first time in India, and then it transferred into Jaipur as a city. So why I'm saying this is that it's not just the tangible, it's also the intangible craftsmanship, that is encouraged and that is promoted. The lime jalis, I remember, like people like in the government, Mr. P.K. Jain, who's now advisor to the Heritage Cell, how he found the jali craftsperson, and got other craftspeople trained under him to make a lime jali. And the person is no more, but at least those traditional techniques have been learned. So this is something that Rajasthan and Jaipur became a model for entire India. I've seen it in sites now. Even when I talked to my colleague Ratish, who's working in Qutub Shahi in Hyderabad, he had to actually take lime masons from Rajasthan to get the first training done. And we did that in Punjab. We were doing some 100 crore worth of projects, and they were craftspeople as well as contractors from Rajasthan who first came there. And though Punjab had its own tradition and there were efforts made for conservation, but when it came to a mass level, they needed more people, more training, and Rajasthan did that. And not only historically, I mean, it was for Golden Temple, for the Alagila work, Maharaja Ranjit Singh had taken. For Lutyens Delhi, the British had got craftspeople from there. So I would say we have so many, and this is just one. Of course, you have the sculpture, stone sculpture work, you have the blue pottery, you have so many crafts which are still living in Jaipur and recognized internationally. So this is all part of the city that we need to retain, not just the built heritage part of it.
Actually, if I can jump back in here and add to this, because we are also doing this for the West Zone Cultural Center. So the West Zone Cultural Center's own building, the Bagod Ki Haveli, is one of the early examples of local level conservation using traditional materials. And I remember one of my visits early on, it was for a seminar, and Mr. Gopinath Sharma was still alive, the historian, and it was a major international seminar. But going to the Bagor Haveli, there was one section which hadn't been finished. And I said, can you leave a wall? Like, don't finish it so we can see the difference in work. And I mean, the look I got was like, where are you from? But then at another point, I happened to be on the board of governors for the West Zone Cultural Center. And they had to an extent gone with it, not fully. So when I repeated it, it was another part of the building. And it was being done. So several people must have said it to them. But the West Zone Cultural Center also, for its own kind of headquarters, has got a building which they can hold up as a model for anywhere else. So as Shikhaji says, across India, we have the examples, and we have a classic example going out for. Sorry, is that my mic? I'm going off for a minute.
So I think, just to pick on what Rima just said, because it's a good point, because Western Cultural Center, I remember it was in 95, 96 that it was being conserved. And that's exactly the time Mr. Peter Jain was involved in its conservation. He was in his official capacity at that time. And that is the time when his schedule of rates were being drafted. I would say that Western Cultural Center was one of the key projects again that enhance this kind of engagement of traditional folks.
As I said, we're very, very lucky to be residents of a state that has a rich repository of heritage and has made diligent efforts across all these years to preserve and promote it for all to see. We've done a lot actually to carry forward our historic traditions, duly supported by organizations and institutions like Jaipur Virasat Foundation and the West Zone Cultural Center. Today, these 3/4 of an hour were very enriching, especially for me to be able to discuss these things with the senior stalwarts of my field. And I do hope that the dissemination of this video with a wider audience will assist them in forging a healthier relationship with heritage and perhaps develop a better appreciation for it. I thank both of you, Dr. Hooja and Dr. Jain, for taking out time to hold this dialogue with me, and the Jaipur Virasat Foundation for asking me to moderate this and facilitating this online meeting. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you for being a team member for this. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Shikha. Thank you, Tanvir. Thank you.